Hey Wargamers, I know it's been a while, but Games Workshop has finally released the balanced Dataslate for June 2024, and so we are going to talk about what that means for the game as a whole, and more specifically what it means for Tau Empire as a faction within the game. That means we will do some overarching analysis and then specifically get into some math hammer in a way that you may be accustomed to from this channel. Now, it's worth noting that since we've done one of these videos, Games Workshop has retired or sunset a significant portion of the Forge World units to Legends. So really, we only have like the Manta and the Tiger Sharks left in our field manual and actually having points associated with them for tournament use. So that's primarily what we're going to be talking on about. Unfortunately, things like the Tetra or the Ivara or the Arvarna, all of those things are now legends. So they don't really have a seat at the table anymore for this kind of analysis, but we can pour one out for them and keep them in our hearts for our casual games. So with that said, let's kind of talk about some of these overarching changes. One of the biggest changes to the game are that abilities that used to give free or duplicate stratagems don't work that way anymore. They don't make the stratagem free, and they don't allow you to duplicate stratagems either. Now they have shifted to being a cost reduction instead of a cost elimination. So it's a -1 CP benefit as opposed to making it wholesale free. And so many stratagems will be free. All those 1 CP strats are free now, but you're not getting free 2 CP stratagems, for example. So 2 CP stratagems now cost 1 with this ability as opposed to being completely free. That's still a major cost savings. That's still a major benefit because CP is so limited in 10th edition, but it's not quite as good as it used to be. They also don't allow you to duplicate stratagems anymore. You used to be able to use these types of rules generally to use a single stratagem multiple times in a phase. That is completely written out, completely crossed out. You can't do that anymore. And so abilities like Pure Tide's Teachings, which is Farsight's ability that allows him to do these things, now no longer gives you free stratagems and doesn't allow you to duplicate them. However, a big change from the last balanced Dataslate is that they are no longer restricted to battle tactics. So that is a huge silver lining, that you're able to use non-battle tactic stratagems in these rules. So that means for Farsight, he can actually use his ability in Rec Cadre, for example, right? In a detachment that makes a lot of sense for him to be in, you can get a benefit, a 1 CP benefit basically per phase from bringing Farsight along. On the other side, it also makes him worse in Mon Ka, because one of the best things about Mon Ka was that you would bring Farsight and you could get like multiple auto advances, full 6-inch advances, and really push your units up right away using Mon Ka. And now you can't do that. You can only use that stratagem once, and so that does impose a limitation and make Farsight a little bit worse in Mon Ka, but certainly better in Rec Cadre. So that's a pretty big change that affects Tau, but also affects a lot of other armies in some pretty significant ways, and we'll have to see what that means for the meta overall. Another big change is that Tank Shock is now based on toughness and not strength, and frankly, this makes a lot of sense, that it's supposed to reflect the bulk of the unit hitting another one, not necessarily them trying to punch them or something like that. So it makes sense. That means that things like Farsight, which you used to use Tank Shock on because of the Dawn Blade having a high strength value, now is no longer a very good target for Tank Shock. He has the same toughness as a normal Crisis Suit, toughness 5, so that's really not that useful. However, actual vehicles, not battle suits, things like Piranhas or Sky Rays, those are going to be things that are going to have more utility here because of their higher toughness. Piranhas with toughness 7 are very fast. They're largely disposable compared to your higher investment vehicles, and they're going to be in a good position. So Piranhas being a target for Tank Shock now makes a lot more sense than something like Farsight. So that's an interesting change as well, and something that will be useful moving forward. And then finally, another big change that touches Tau as a faction is that units that regenerate after death using stratagems are now only once per battle. So this is something that affects a lot of different factions. Think about your Tyranids, for example, or another faction where this is a really big deal. But for Tau, this specifically hurts the Crude Hunting Pack detachment, which is already a detachment that has some challenges associated with it, let's say. The Crude Hunting Pack detachment has a stratagem that allows you to, regenerate a unit of Crude that have been removed from the battlefield. You can now only do that once, and as a whole, that's not super. I mean, that's useful, but really one of the strengths of the detachment was being able to do that, you know, more than once. So yeah, we're limited here, but overall in the meta, this is probably a win in terms of how it hurts other factions more than it hurts us. So overall, some pretty big shifts in how things are going to function across the board, but again, specifically within Tau, our favorite blue boys and girls. So with that said, let's take a look at some Math Hammer. Now, if you are a longtime viewer of the channel, you're familiar with how I do this, but basically I'm going to go through a bunch of different target profiles and look at what are the most offensively efficient choices. So which units do the most damage per point cost against these different targets. And unlike previous iterations of this exercise, I am taking into account things like if a target unit is an infantry or if it is a vehicle for things specifically like the Star Scythe and the Sunforge Crisis Battlesuit variants. So we'll talk about that going forward here and then wrap it all up talking about kind of how this all panned out and what that means for your army composition. Okay, so starting off with some little guys here. These are Guardsmen and Eldar Guardian profiles, so toughness 3 with a 5 up or 4 up save respectively, and this pans out to be pretty much as you might expect. So the most efficient choices for Guardsmen or against Guardsmen are things like Star Size, especially with Flamers, and you'll see this kind of play out across the entirety of this video, but Star Size with Flamers are going to be the most points efficient, but of course there is more than points efficiency to take into account. Particularly things like range are important. So burst cannons or mixed burst cannons and Flamers also perform fairly similarly here, at least in terms of their rankings across the codex. And so even though I'm saying Star Size with Flamers, you could also use Star Size with burst cannons and have a comparable result that may be less situational than Flamers, right? If we're talking about taking into account like range and how many turns you actually get to use the thing and all that stuff, right? So Star Size probably with Flamers, but not necessarily. Breachers with Fireblade, Pathfinders with Ion Rifles, Strikes Teams with Fireblades, Fire Knives with Missiles. Again, Fire Knives can take missile pods or plasma rifles, and you do have comparable performance here, but really against these smaller targets, things like missiles make a lot more sense, and you have the range, so that all works. The thing about Fire Knives, though, is that they have an extra ability when their target unit is at full strength, and you're able to basically fully re-roll your hits when the target is at full strength. That drops to re-rolling ones when they're not at full strength. And so I have this little asterisk here to indicate that this is the best case scenario where you're firing at a fresh unit. This is when Fire Knives shine, of course, but other cases, not pictured here, but you'll see later, they show up without the asterisks, and that means that they're still good. They're still showing up in the rankings, even without that benefit, right? Commanders. This specifically means Cold Stars and Enforcers now. There are no actual Crisis Commanders in the Codex, so you just have your Cold Stars and your Enforcers. All of those are kind of clustered around here with Burst Cannons as their kind of basis for output against Guardsmen. And then Stealth Suits also show up here as an efficient unit. And that's really interesting because Stealth Suits have a lot to offer aside from their offensive point ability, right, or their offensive damage output. They are good at holding objectives. They're good at board control. They're great for homing beacons. They're good for spotting, especially. So for guiding other units, they're really good at that. And so the fact that they even show up on these rankings at all means that stealth suits are a premium unit overall, right? Shifting over to Guardians, we have many of the same units showing up: Breachers with a Fireblade, Starsize with Flamers, Strike Teams with Fireblade, Pathfinders with Ion. The Tiger Shark shows up here for the first time, and not the last, with Burst Cannons. And again, there's limitations to using a large flyer like a Tiger Shark, right? Fire Knives with Missiles again, and Vespids show up as well. So we're seeing kind of the units that you would expect to be good at taking care of infantry blocks, being good at taking care of infantry blocks. And that's a theme that's going to play out here, you'll see. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. All right, looking at some Toughness 4 profiles. Primaris Marines, Toughness 4, 3 up, 2 wounds. We see Breachers with the Fireblade, the Vespids, the Fire Knives, again showing up. And this time I just have the asterisks there because it's basically 1, 2, 3, in terms of, you know, things with missiles or plasma rifles or both. Fire Knives are all showing up right here together. So, you know, dealer's choice. Strike Teams with Fireblade, Pathfinders with Rail Rifles, Starsize, and then the Crudox with the Repeater shows up here. Now, this is giving it the benefit of rapid fire, but I don't think that that's unfair because it has a 36-inch range, so it's fairly easy to get it within rapid fire. Alternatively, you could think about this as representing the ability of Crudox to return fire when their buddy Crud are being targeted. So either you can think about this as the rapid fire benefit, you know, giving them extra shots, or you can think about this as them not being within rapid fire range, but being able to fire twice because of their buddies getting shot at. Either way, if you want to do both of those things, then they're even better, right? Sanguinary Guard, Toughness 4, 2 up, save 2 wounds. Vespid, Breachers, Fire Knives, Pathfinders with Rail, Broadsides with Rail, Starsize, Fire Knives show up here. And again, this is a place where Fire Knives show up without the benefit of targeting a fresh unit. So Fire Knives by themselves with plasma, so 2 plasma rifles, really do carry some weight here. And if you are using them, you know, as the initial punch, which is kind of how they're designed to be used with their special rules, you're getting a lot of utility out of them, and then you can follow it up. You can clean up the unit in the next turn using their plasma rifles. You know, against Sanguinary Guard, against a melee unit, you know, you might have some caution there in terms of avoiding close combat and all that. But nonetheless, if they're on the board, they'll be able to carry some weight. All right, targeting something like a broadside battlesuit or a Starweaver, so toughness 6 units. Broadside units with the 2 up save and 8 wounds. Sunforged suits really start to show up a lot from this point forward because we're moving into monsters and vehicles, right? And so broadsides being vehicles, being targeted by Sunforged suits, yeah, the Sunforged get a lot of benefit out of that because they get to reroll their wounds, they get to reroll their damage, and being Melta too, like you get a lot of utility out of that. So Sunforged suits top the charts here as being an absolutely awesome unit to use against basically any vehicle, but we're going to start off here with broadsides. Fire Knives with the benefit also very strong. Broadsides with rail rifles, Cold Stars with fusion blasters, Piranhas with fusion blasters, Fire Knives with plasma, Breachers with the Fireblade. You know, again, the Breachers with the Fireblade are going to show up basically across the board. Breachers are always good, especially in this new mission set, Pariah Nexus. Breachers are going to be a fantastic unit, always have been in this edition and will continue to be a fantastic unit in this edition. And that's not just because of their offensive points efficiency, but because of many other things. But again, this is just, again, more evidence about why you want to seriously consider Breachers as a strategic choice in your army list. They're able to take care of a lot of different things just by the quality of their shots and the volume of fire that they have when they're joined by a Fireblade. It's kind of surprising that you don't see that tuned down a little bit in some way here. Starweavers, 4 up save, 6 wounds. So again, very many of the same units showing up here. Sunforge, Fire Knives, Breachers, Broadsides, Fire Knives without the benefit of targeting a fresh unit. The Tiger Shark with Ion Cannon shows up here as well. And then Crudox with the Repeater again. Again, that's giving it the benefit of rapid fire, but again, I think that's fair. So the Crudox doing some work here as well. Moving on to some toughness 11 and 12 things. Let's look at the Land Raider, toughness 12, 2-up save, 16 wounds. Sunforge suits, again, not a big surprise. Storm Surges show up here, I think for the first time in this video. Storm Surges of almost any flavor show up highly in this calculation. Broadsides with the heavy rail rifle, Tiger Shark with the rail, Fire Knives with the benefit, Sky Rays, Piranhas with Fusion Blasters all show up here. And again, Sky Rays are an amazing unit. They're doing a lot of damage. Piranhas with Fusion Blaster, you can tank shock now, pretty decent. So that's something to consider as well. Lehman Russ, toughness 11, 2-up save, 13 wounds. Storm Surge, Broadsides with rail, Storm Surge, Tiger Shark with rail, Fire Knives, Sky Ray, Breachers, again, Breachers just like show up all over the place because they have the volume of fire. Now, the difference in efficiency here, I should note, is significant, is substantial, right? Like Sunforge suits are far, far more efficient than Breachers are at taking care of Lehman Russes, but if we're looking at the top 7 units, this is where the Breachers just slide in under the door, or under the wire, whatever you want to call it. So like they show up, they still have some utility, but Sunforge are obviously going to be the strongest choice here, and certainly stronger than Breachers. All right, let's switch it up a little bit, as is customary. Let's transition into a discussion about things with and vulnerable saves. So starting again with the little guys here, Zangors, toughness 4, 6-up save, 1 wound, and a 6++. We see many of the usual suspects: strike teams, breachers, star size, pathfinders, stealth team, cold star, tiger shark with burst. All those things show up here as being really points efficient. Terminators, toughness 5, 2-up save, 3 wounds, and a 4++. Breachers, fire knives, Vespid, pathfinders with rail, broadsides with rail, tiger shark with ion, fire knives, primarily with plasma, but not exclusively, even without the benefit, show up as effective units against Terminators, which is kind of how they've been historically conceptualized. So that makes sense that plasma rifle suits are going to be good, at least decent at taking out Terminators, right? So it's intuitive. And that's kind of the theme of the video, is that a lot of these calculations, a lot of these points efficiencies are intuitive, especially in a way that I think is more notable than it has been in the past. It has not always been that the calculated points efficiency match how you would conceptualize each unit. You get some kind of weird order of things in some places. That's not really the case here, right? The things that you think would be good at taking out certain units are generally good at that. Moving up in toughness here, Custodians, 2-up save, 4 wounds, 4++, invulnerable. Fire Knives, Broadsides, Tiger Shark, Fire Knives without the benefit, Vespid, Riptides with the Ion Accelerator, Pathfinders with Rail. Yeah, all those things should be good at taking out Custodians, and they are according to the math. Hive Tyrants, toughness 10, 2-up save, 10 wounds, 4++. Sunforge, Broadsides, Breachers, Tiger Shark, Fire Knives, Sky Ray, Storm Surge. Nice. There's definitely fair amount of utility here in that list, right? And actually, Skyray probably would do a little bit better than I have it here, because this isn't necessarily accounting for Hive Tyrant having fly. So Magnus, toughness 11, 2-up, 16 wounds, 4++. Sunforge suits, again, doing some work. Broadsides, Breachers, Fire Knives, Tiger Sharks with Rail, Sky Rays. Again, same disclaimer as before. Storm Surge, Wraith Knight, toughness 12, 2-up save, 18 wounds, 4++. Sunforge, Broadsides, Fire Knives, Tiger Sharks, Storm Surge, Sky Ray, Pathfinders. And again, this is the whole unit. And there is, this is, I think Sunforge suits are like four times more efficient than Pathfinders, or at least twice as efficient than Pathfinders against Wraith Knights. So don't read too much into that. Doesn't mean you should spam Pathfinders to take out Wraith Knights. Um, that's probably not going to be very effective, especially because Pathfinders um, they die really easily. Um, so Pathfinders have some utility here, right? But they they're not the same as Sunforge. Sunforge and broadsides, fire knives, those are all going to do way more work than Pathfinders against something like a Wraith Knight. So look to the top of the list, but keep the bottom of the list in mind in a pinch, I guess. Imperial Knights, toughness 12, 3-up save, 22 wounds, and a 5++. Sunforge, broadside, fire knives, storm surge, sky raid, tiger shark, and piranhas, all offering a fair amount of utility here. So yeah, we kind of settled in on a consistent list of units, and for the most part, I think it's really intuitive that the units that are performing well against each of these targets are the ones that you would expect to perform well against them. And again, that has not always been the case. And so I think that Games Workshop deserves a little bit of a tip of the hat for the pricing on these guys, because it does show that the units that you would envision being effective in a certain role are priced accordingly. The Crisis variants, for example, act as you'd expect. The Star Scythe suits are good at taking out infantry. The Sunforge suits are good against taking out vehicles and monsters. The fire knives are good at taking out kind of elite infantry, but also broadly against being kind of like a first strike unit. Those are all kind of doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and that's great. Units that don't have strong support rules, that most of their value is comprised of their offensive ability, are the ones that are showing up at the top of the charts, right? They're the ones that are showing up as being the most points efficient, which makes sense, because if we're thinking about how things are being priced, those units that are primarily support units shouldn't also be the most points efficient damage dealers, right? Their value is not in their damage dealing, it's in those support elements. And so the things that we do see as really points efficient are things that don't have as strong of a support role. Things like breachers, broadsides, crisis suits, tiger sharks, sky rays. Those are all things that aren't necessarily support units, right? Like, you can use them to guide other units, and there's reasons why you may or may not want to do that. Specifically, if these units are already efficient, maybe you want to use them as spotters to help improve the efficiency of other parts of your army, but maybe you don't want to use them because you really want to get the benefit of something like having stealth suits spot for them, and you want those rerolls. So there's strategy, there's tactics involved in doing that as well. But these units that are really offensively designed are the ones that are showing up here, and that's great. That shows some good effort and dedication to balance here from Games Workshop in a way that I don't know if I've always been able to say that. So that's cool. Now, of course, this isn't the end-all be-all. This doesn't account for detachments, right? This doesn't take into account things like the Manka special rules where you're getting lethal hits. That affects different units to varying extent, right? It's going to be far more useful for kind of volume of fire units than it is for quality of fire units, and so that is going to shift the calculations, and so we'll have to do another video looking at that. It doesn't account for things like the benefits to Kroot and how that disproportionately favors Kroot and Kroot hunting packs compared to non-Kroot units. So that's another video. We'll talk about that another time. So it doesn't account for things like that. Also doesn't affect guiding, right? Because as we discussed, the choice of which units are spotters and which ones are guided is going to affect the relative efficiency within your army. You're going to be increasing the efficiency of your guided unit and, kind of holding the efficiency, I guess, of your observer unit the same. So, that's not accounted for here. And the biggest thing, of course, is that Mathhammer is not Warhammer. There's so much more to the game than just Mathhammer, and I have to say this every time because I know there's going to be comments about it. but Warhammer is not just Math Hammer. There's so much more that goes into it. Movement is probably the biggest part of the game, and yet it has nothing to do with any of these calculations. So don't put your whole army design into these rankings or anything like that. Overall, I think this type of analysis does suggest that there are multiple viable builds, right? That you could select basically any detachment out of the codex and have some of the units that you would want in that type of army showing up as efficient damage dealers, right? Even the Crutox for the Crude Hunting Pack shows up a few times, right? Crutox actually not bad because it's pretty darn cheap for what you get, and that's cool, right? So yeah, overall, I think the Dataslate is really pushing the game in the right direction. I think the points changes here are moving the codex in the right direction, and I'm excited to see how Pariah Nexus plays as a whole given these changes. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, happy wargaming.
Watching. If you stuck around to this point in the video, maybe you want to join our Discord community as well. There's a link in the description below. Special thanks to all my supporters over on Patreon, but especially the folks that you see on your screen now. If you want to help make more invasive wargaming videos, consider joining our community over there as well.